Hello, I'm Father Scott Vanderveer, and this is Profiles of Endurance. All of us, as we're growing up, try to figure out what it is that would be best for us to do with our lives. Some of us depend on guidance counselors or career fairs. Some of us just want to find out what jobs make the most income and follow that path. But for many of us, we find ourselves waiting to receive instructions. Others, without ever having invited guidance to come into their lives, find that there is a calling of sorts bubbling up inside of them. We're here to talk with someone today who is following a calling. Danielle Epting is a 24-year-old writer who lives here in the Albany area. And she and I have known each other since I was her middle school religion teacher at St. Pius School in Loudonville, New York. Her life has taken many twists and turns since then, and I have gone from knowing her as a sixth grade student to now a professional writer and a prosperous and productive member of the educational and artistic community here in our area. I'm here to talk with her today about what it feels like to receive promptings, to know what you are meant to do with your life, and then to follow them. And so I'm thrilled to welcome Dani here with us now. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And let's start by just finding out a little more about you and about your growing up years and about your family.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. So I grew up here in Albany, and I went to St. Pius for elementary and middle school, and that's where we met. My family consists of me, my parents. I do have a half-sister as well. Mm. And then after St. Pius, I went to Catholic High, and and then I did St. Rose for my undergrad and UAlbany for my graduate degree.
What did you pursue at St. Rose?
St. Rose, so I started in education, and then quickly switched to English and creative writing.
And what led to that switch?
So I was in an education course, and we were doing, it was like a geometry education course, and I was learning how to teach geometry to kids, and I was sitting there, and I was like, oh no, this is not for me. And I was like, oh. So that same semester, my advisor had recommended that I take a creative writing course. I needed to fill 3 more credits or something. And I was like, sure, I have to do it. And I was in that course, and the professor was so cool. She had us doing all these exercises and things. And the one day she pulled me aside after we wrote this, we had to do a fiction story. And she said, you should consider doing this more. Even if you just write by yourself, I think, you have something here.
Oh.
And I was like, oh. And so it just started to kind of come together. And she was telling me about other courses that were available for writers, but I could only take them if I was, an English and writing major. So I switched the next week, and I never looked back.
Wow. What did it feel like to move away from what you thought you wanted to do? Was there fear involved in that?
Yeah, it was definitely tricky because I had, believed I was going to be a teacher, and I had told friends and family that I was, going for education, and in my first semester, I was switching already.
Yeah.
But I think that happens a lot in life. We think we're going to do one thing, and then other opportunities or talents we didn't know we had come along, and we switch our path.
It is very, very true. And I think it's amazing that professor who you met by chance, that was like a class that you weren't intending to take, recognized this in you. Did it echo anything that earlier teachers had noticed in you? Did your high school teachers or middle school teachers notice your writing ability?
So when I was at Catholic High, I was taking a theology class, and my theology teacher, we used to do reflections every week, and we have to write what we were thinking, our connection to God that week. And she had said to me, you have talent for writing. And she was like, do you write on your own? And I was like, no, not really. after my professor had said to me, writing is something you should try, even if you just do it on your own, whatever, I remembered that as well, because it was something that she had mentioned to me. So, yeah.
You know what it reminds me of? I obviously became a priest about 8 years ago, and I had thought about it for 20 years before actually doing it.
Wow.
One of the things I've learned, and that they make an effort to teach priests, is when you are talking to young people and you think that one of them might have a call to religious life as a sister, a brother, a priest, you really need to understand, they say, that they need to hear it from I think you'd be good at this, from 3 different unrelated people before it really sticks. Isn't that interesting? So now I'm wondering, does that jog any memories for you of other people who said something to you? Or were you just attentive to this? Like, so your theology teacher said, I don't know if you're doing this on your own, but you've got a talent for this. And then at St. Rose, does it make you feel like maybe you were open to that kind of guidance? Or do you think that it was probably coming from other places too that you just can't quite remember?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I definitely was open to it as well. I can remember being younger and having so many journals, and I remember being in like 3rd grade, and there was like a girl that was very mean to me, and so I would write about it, and my mom was really big on that too. She said, write your feelings. It's a great way to track just your progress and how you're feeling day to day. And I wrote this like entire little book in my journal about a girl who like overcame bullies and whatever. So I always remember like just writing when I was younger. And so I don't know, I guess just as I got older, more people said stuff. And that was the first professor who said that to me. And then once I did switch, there were other professors who would say things as well. So there was definitely more than 2 people along the line. Oh,
that's very cool. That's very cool. You know what? A therapist once said to me that you don't even need, if you're using writing as a way to get emotions out of you, you don't even need to say it, because there's something or save it is what I meant to say, because there's something magical about the connection between the mind, the heart, and the writing hand. It really draws the poison out of us to write about what is hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that happens with writing. We kind of access our subconscious, and that's what I like so much about it. Whether you're doing like nonfiction or fiction writing, I've seen that so many times. Even when I'm writing my short stories, you want you as the writer kind of learn something as well, because you're accessing this different part of your brain that you don't normally use, and you're learning things about you that you don't realize maybe bother you, or you don't realize maybe you needed to work on. And so writing is so therapeutic in that way.
It's so true. That's been true for me as well. And then there's the added decision of, am I going to save this? If it's something about my life, is it something I want to save? Or is it something that it has served me and it can go? And I'm thinking of Dorothy Day, who's on the road to sainthood right now, the longtime founder of the Catholic worker movement. And one of the things that she said was that writing and keeping a journal always helped her build her faith, because she found that if she wrote about her problems and then would wait a little while, if she'd look back to the problems of 6 months or a year ago, most of them resolved without her having to do anything about it. And it filled her with a sense that God was good.
Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting. It's another added benefit. So talk to us about how your decision came about to go to grad school in this field as well. What was happening when you were finishing up your undergrad?
So it's actually very interesting how this came about, because I was applying to MFA programs, so Masters of Fine Arts of Writing specifically, and they're very competitive. They're hard to get into, and I was accepted into Sarah Lawrence College near the city, and I went for 1 semester, and it was not for me. And that was, again, a trying time. And I was like, wow, I got accepted here. I told all these people, and I don't like it. I don't feel like it's for me. I moved there. I had an apartment. It was So, yeah, so that was tough. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I knew that I still wanted to write. I knew that was, foundational. That wasn't changing. But where I was not for me. And so I transferred to UAlbany. And so I was there for the fall semester in Sarah Lawrence, and then I came back and went to UAlbany for the spring semester. And
how did you
ended up being... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I don't mean to interrupt. I actually probably should let you finish, but I wanted to ask, how did you know that it wasn't the entire program that was wrong for you and not just the place? When someone feels that it's not a good fit, I feel like there's always that temptation to panic and to say, this, obviously I'm not supposed to do this. But you had to parse out, what about this isn't right? How did you figure out that it was Sarah Lawrence and not this pursuit that was wrong?
It was kind of almost a gut feeling, because it wasn't even so much that I didn't like the program. It just felt wrong to me. I was also missing my family, and it was just a totally different experience for me being, even though, the city's not extremely far from Albany, but it was a totally different culture there, and it just felt wrong in my gut. I was trying to get into my classes, and I just couldn't. I didn't feel right there. I learned so much. I learned a lot while I was there, but it just felt, I didn't feel like myself, and I was kind of spiraling as well. I was spiraling down, and mentally I wasn't feeling healthy, and it just wasn't good. And almost instantly when I came home, things were better, mentally and just physically. I felt more like myself. And I ended up learning a great deal at UAlbany in their program and their fiction courses that we had. And that's where I started putting together a manuscript as well of short stories that I wrote. And there was a professor there who helped me with that specifically and said, you need to, he didn't even ask. He basically said, you need to start submitting this. And I was like, okay. And I started submitting a short story collection that he had helped me put together for publication. And that's what my book is that's coming out next month. So it all sort of happened for a reason, because if that hadn't happened, I would never have met that professor. I would never have had those classes that helped me put that manuscript together.
I love that story. And it, oh man. It also reminds me that it's so important when we recognize someone having a special ability or talent to name it with them and to be very clear, because that encouragement really, that catapulted you in a big way.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't have done it. I was like, no, these aren't good. And he was like, no, you need to submit these. And I was like, okay.
Danny, help me understand. This is one of those moments where sometimes you can't believe that someone can do something because it's so different than what you're able to do. What part of your mind creates fiction stories? I think it's fascinating to talk to somebody who has an imagination that can produce stories with intricate plots that draw others in. It's like you're sharing a fantasy world with us and drawing us in. Where does that come from? So
I think a lot of my fiction stories are rooted in experiences or emotions I've had. I try to, people who say fiction is all fake. I don't believe that. Even extreme fantasy and alternate universes that people create, even that is grounded in human emotions and characteristics of real people. So even there's some truth in that. But I always say that my fiction stories are 30% truth and 70% fiction that I've made up in my head. But I always start with that, with an emotion or with something that's happened, and then sometimes I'll just have an idea that I'll get stuck on, or a specific character, and then I'll just sort of build a world around that. And when I'm writing, it's all very subconscious, and sometimes I'll you kind of write something, and then you're like, where did that come from? And it all comes from within you somewhere, but Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain, I guess.
What is
Yeah.
your relationship to the characters that you create?
I think in a way, I mean, writing in a way is very selfish because you are writing a lot about yourself and your emotions, and I think that there's a piece of me in all of the characters. But I think I try to use the characters to be as realistic as possible. I'll give them. I carry around little notebooks with me, and I use the notes in my phone all the time to write down like real things that people say or do, or little characteristics that they have, and I'll use them in my stories to bring them to life, because I want readers to see them and be like, wow, that's an actual person. And my stories are more so realist stories, so the events and things that happen to people in them could happen to anyone. And that's what I think makes them more relatable, because we all go through things, and the things we go through aren't necessarily always talked about. So
Fascinating. So what kind of writing is most satisfying for you as a writer?
I mean, fiction, of course, but I think a lot of my stories are not happy stories, and I've had people mention that to me before. But I think that's because life is hard, life is difficult, and people don't really want to read happy stories, they want to read a story about someone who goes through something and learns something from it, because it's in those times when we really need comfort and we need to know that we're not the only one dealing with it. And so I think fiction is useful in that way, because you can connect with the characters based on whatever is happening in your life. And I mean, sometimes it's great to read a story and be like, oh yeah, happy ending, but other times you want to read something and know like that's real life, that's what happens,
Absolutely.
So I think that's the most satisfying.
And every great religious tradition, the Christian and all the others, always are rooted in the suffering that's part of life. Jesus says, take up your cross, and Buddha says, life is suffering. So no matter what, it's really true. It's just the honesty of that. I would also say that I have read writing, when I'm reading the writing of someone who I think really is connecting with me, I feel less alone. I feel like I know them. It would be hard for me to not speak with them with familiarity if I met them, because these people who live far away, to me, they know my heart, and so I feel like I know theirs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything, and this might be a hard question to answer, so feel free to pass on it, but is there anything that you learned about writing and or about life in your program at UAlbany that maybe wouldn't be something that those who choose a different path would get to learn? I'm fascinated by even the fact that you take classes on fiction, which means that there is a methodology out there. There's a pedagogy for helping people to learn this craft that I think to those of us who haven't been part of it, we don't understand what that process would be like. So I guess that if I'm trying to get at the heart of this question, it is, what is it that you learned in that program that the rest of us might find fascinating, because we're not learning it in our other walks of life?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we definitely studied fiction and studied good stories as if it was like we were studying, science or chemistry. We would spend time, we would get assignments where we had to outline stories and figure out what made the story work, which I thought was so interesting, because before going into that major, I never would have thought that writers did that. I always thought what makes a good writer is they have a good story, but that's not it. You can have a story, but that doesn't mean you're going to know how to write it. And so I definitely learned how to write within those classes. And something else I learned too, just about writing in general, is that some writers are gardeners and some are architects. So some will plant a seed of a story and then watch it grow kind of through their subconscious. They don't really know how it's going to happen or where it's going to grow. And others are architects. They know exactly what they're going to say and how the story's going to go before they even put their pen to the paper. But
And they don't make a value judgment which is better. The writing community doesn't value one over the other?
No, because it just depends on how the story unfolds that makes it whether it's good or not, And most of the times you can't really tell which one the author is when you read the story, because you don't know their process.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Wow. Which are you?
I'm definitely a gardener.
Wow.
I just watch it happen.
Oh, that's so exciting. That's so exciting. Wow. So talk to us about what a good day of writing is like for you. Can you take us? I would imagine that no 2 days are exactly the same, but I could be wrong. What is a good day of writing like for you?
Yeah. So for my job now, I write a lot during the day. So most of my personal writing happens at night, and it kind of did anyways, so it's okay. I'll usually start like after dinner, and it'll be like 6 o'clock, and then suddenly it'll be like 8, and then 10, and
wow.
then it's like 1 a.m. So I don't do it every night, of course, but that's when I feel I have something to write. And then of course I do like on the weekends too, but I never force it. That's another thing that maybe people won't agree. Certain writers agree and disagree with this, but I don't force writing. I think there's like a big, and we talked about this last time I saw you too, there's a big difference in my opinion between like writer's block and knowing when you have something to say. So like if I feel I have something that I want to write about but I just can't get it out, that's definitely writer's block in action. But there's times when I'll go months and I won't like look at my computer or put my pen to paper. And there's a great nonfiction essayist, Joanne Beard, who says, she goes years sometimes. She was married to a man once, and she didn't write for like years at a time. But I think it's during those times that we kind of get material to write. We have to live to be able to write something of value to other people.
Oh,
so
how true. So it's not wasted time. It's you're gathering. You're in the forest foraging.
Right. You're studying.
You are studying. I love that.
In a way.
Do you often find yourself in a flow that takes over?
Yeah. I think that's what keeps me up a lot of times. Sometimes when I'm really in it, and I love those moments because it just feels like you're in like an alternate universe in your subconscious. You just start really getting into it. And those are the moments when suddenly I'll have a story and it's like, who just wrote that? That's what makes me a gardener, I guess, because it kind of, and I think that's where God really plays in too, because this is a talent he's given me that sometimes I feel completely unaware of. Like I feel like he's in control of it, writing for me almost.
Oh, I love that. And it reminds me of something I heard that I found fascinating, the concept of genius, that it's a Greek concept. And that we modern Westerners have changed the concept from what it was. We now often refer to somebody who's a really good writer, for example, as a writing genius. We'll say, oh, that their work is brilliant. She's a genius. Yeah. And what they say, what I heard is, that's not the Greek way of thinking of it. In the Greek sense, you are not a genius, you have a genius. Almost like a spirit that is given you, or a gift, or a possession of a good spirit. Yeah. You're possessed by a good spirit. And so they say that one of the things you have is a relationship with your genius that was given you by God. It's not yours. It's not you. It's a gift. Yeah. And so you saying that strikes me as a confirmation of the truth of that. Yeah. That it's a gift you have, not a thing you are.
Exactly. That's 100% what it feels like. It feels like an other to me.
Oh,
yeah.
So does that mean that you're writing? Does a piece of writing ever catch you by surprise? Do you ever feel like you're in some commercial for some kind of like, I don't know, healthcare item for things that are urgent, where you're like at dinner and all of a sudden a story hits you and you're like, check please. Sorry, I'll see you next time. Bye.
Yes. Sometimes it's strange because with fiction you can put yourself in so many other shoes than your own, and I've been talking about this story to some of my friends and family often because it's such a strange story I've written lately. It's called Banana Split, and it's about this wife who has been buying bananas for her husband for years. And suddenly he stops eating the bananas, and she's having like a breakdown about it. She's like, "Why aren't you eating the bananas anymore?" And it's like it's the start of the end of their relationship. But the story goes through all sorts of, loops and twists and turns. And then, the husband gets sick and all this stuff. But I'm writing from this, she's like a 60-year-old woman, and I'm writing from her perspective. And some people have read it, and they're like, how are you writing? It sounds like you've been married for 30 years. And it's strange because I've never, been married. And it's kind of this, like, it takes over my mind. And I feel like I'm writing as this woman. So...
Oh my goodness, I love it. I love it. That's fascinating. Now tell me, was it hard for them to buy in to you doing this? There is something about writing that many of us associate with starvation.
Yes. I still do some days.
It feels like a lot of things in the arts where it is so risky. Yeah. How did your family respond to you pursuing something so based in this the need to have a relationship with a genius rather than a really nice safety net like a lot of people have going to work for a corporation?
Yeah, I remember the only time that my parents ever questioned it was when I first switched my major, and they were like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yep." And they were like, "Okay." And they're so supportive. I feel so blessed and lucky to have them because they support me in anything I do. And I've made, countless mistakes in my life, and they've like watched it and let me do it and then been there when it's over. They've been like, "Okay, like we learned and now next," So I feel very lucky to have them. And my friends, they read all my stuff, and I love that because, not everything I produce is good. So they'll read all the good and the bad stuff, which is awesome. But when it comes to, like, jobs and stability in that sense, sometimes I do think, I'm like, wow, maybe I should have gone to school for, like, a specific degree, like maybe physical therapy or social work, where I would know what job I'm going to have, because sometimes it's I'm not sure, you get an English degree and then it's like, okay, good luck, like figure out what you're going to do for your job. And writing doesn't necessarily make a lot of money. So yeah, but it sort of feels like that's just what I need to do. It's what makes me happy. It's what I feel inside. And so, we don't make it out of this life alive. So why would I waste my time?
Oh, I love that line. We're not going to make it out of this life alive, so you got to live.
It's true.
Oh,
it's true. And I think a lot of our daily lives we spend ignoring that fact. And I think we do have to ignore it to a degree just to function in daily life. But it's important to kind of keep it maybe in like the third or fourth layer of our mind so that our actions reflect what we really want and how we want our life to go, because at the end of the day, like, it's just us. It's going to be us at the end. So, yeah.
Just love it. Love it. Love it. So many things I want to ask, but let me go to this topic. It sounds clearly like this is a calling in your life. This is not a decision that you made. You had to decide to follow it, but it's not a decision that you made after like looking at pros and cons of careers and going to a career day. This is a calling. How does a calling feel different to you following it than a career?
Yes. So, I mean, just money-wise, I don't think I'll be living off of my short stories, unless I become some famous author, which I don't know about that. But, so in that sense, but it, like I've mentioned, it makes me feel better. It's like therapy for me. I feel like people who read it can gain something from it. It feels like a genius is working through me. So it just feels like something that I have to do. And a career, I think you can like your career. People can like what they do for a living. And if you're lucky, whatever your calling is, you can make a career out of your calling. So. Yeah.
You sharing that reminds me of something the writer Elizabeth Gilbert said, and I really appreciate her writing, and I really appreciate her wisdom. And she said that she had to make a decision that she would support her writing. She spoke to her writing like it was a genius that she had to take care of, that was living with her, and that she was privileged to be able to host. And what she said to her writing, she said was, I will support you. I don't expect you to support me. Isn't that interesting? That. I love it. I'm going to work. And so she said in the beginning, she worked as a waitress so that she could support her writing. She didn't demand being successful so that her writing could support her. What a thing to say. Nice. Yeah, I thought so too. Now let me ask you this. I am living a calling as well, and I enjoy telling people I enjoy telling people something that they are sometimes shocked by, and I've never said it on the podcast, but I can certainly go into more about it sometime in a conversation with you personally or with the listeners at some point. But there's a lot of things about being a priest that I do not like. There's a lot of things that would not be my choice. And yet I am called to it. So I'll tell you, I was asked not too long ago to talk to a bunch of high school students about what it was like to be a priest. And I realized that it might be an opportunity to reflect on calling. And so I got together with a couple other friends who are in life paths that are callings. And we brainstormed this list of things that were true for us about a calling. And I'd like to just get your reaction to it. There's 8 things here. And maybe one of them will stand out because it's especially true for you. Or maybe you'll say that's not true in my case. But here is what, for the career day, we brainstormed. Number 1, a calling meaningfully affects other people's lives. It's a meaningful path. Number 2, it causes you to be seen differently by others. When they find out that's what you do, they go, oh. On some level. Number 3, gives you access to parts of other people's lives that are usually off limits. Number 4, involves restrictions to your freedom. You have to live a little differently than you might. Number 5, contains parts that you don't like but cannot avoid. Number 6, you can justify in your calling without guilt at times, letting your work take priority above other things. If it's a calling, for example, many people who are married with children who have a calling, sometimes their kids and their spouse have to take a back seat, and it's understood. It's because of the calling.
Right.
Number 7, the people in your life intersect with your work, whether they know it or not, and whether or not you're aware of it. And number 8, you would do it without pay if you had to. Are any of those standing out to you, either because they're especially true or because they're especially not fitting for you?
I just took notes, so I'm just rereading.
Oh, so Danny!
I would definitely say, I have done and would continue to write without pay for the rest of my life.
Wow.
So absolutely. The fact that you are seen different. I've had a couple of my short stories get published in magazines, and I get nervous because I've had a couple nonfiction and, several fiction, and sometimes, especially with the nonfiction stories, I'm like, oh gosh, who's going to read it, But it's like, it feels like what I'm saying in the story is going to help other people, and I want to put it out there. I want, that human experience to be able to be read, but you worry a little bit about what people are going to say and how it's going to be taken, and then the access to off-limits part of people, that stuck out for me, for you, because I'm sure as a priest, people are more willing to share their lives with you. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's,
It's very, what's funny for me is a lot of people think because it is a celibate path that it's a lonely path. And I find it's quite the opposite, that people share so intimately with me that I feel so connected to people. Right. Yeah. It's remarkably intimate.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I found myself thinking too, you have access to parts of other people's lives off limits a lot of it's imaginationally, like the fact that you understand on some level what it's like to be married for 30 years, though you're not. There's
Right.
like you're able to express
Yeah.
things that in your imagination you have access in a way that that often others don't. Um, yeah. I wondered about the restrictions to your freedom. One thing I think a lot of our listeners probably noticed that I noticed is, my day job is writing, and then my passion is writing. And I just remember when I was a teacher. When I was a teacher, there was one ministry at church I would never ever do, and that was faith formation. Depending on what our listeners know it as, faith formation, Sunday school, religious ed, CCD. I was like heck, I'm gonna stand in front of a classroom full of students on my day off. Like this is
Right.
so.
Right.
I'm noticing how that's powerful. You are writing
Yeah.
during the day. And we'll talk in a minute about that day job because I find that fascinating as well. But then your passion, often there are days where you take a break for dinner and then you start your real calling in your vocational life, which is to write, maybe till like midnight.
Yeah.
What is that like to that to me feels like a great restriction to your freedom. Your genius sometimes you might be saying, I'm going out tonight, and your genius goes, no, you're not. You're putting your butt back in the chair.
Yeah, I've come across that before where I have plans or whatever, and then I'll start a story and I'm like, I do not have plans, So it all depends on how intense like the story or the idea I have is. A lot of times when I have an idea, it'll be like an obsession for a couple days. So luckily enough, I can like get it done within a few days, and then I'll put it away for like a week or two, and then pull it back out to like edit it and change it around and do whatever. So I would say it does restrict my freedom, but then again, I mean, I like doing that, so it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like I like being up till 12 tapping at my computer and writing something that is meaningful to me and hopefully to people who will read it.
I love it. To hear you speak with that kind of enthusiasm is so exciting. All right, let me give you an example for me of my next question. There are parts of my calling that I do not like, and one of the very clear ones for me is being told where to live. I really struggle with that. I do not like, of all the places, if I were given a choice of where to live, there's almost certainly one that I would not live in, and that would be the house next to work, or above, in my case, above work. Like I'm in an apartment above one of the offices. And now I love my house, and for those who are parishioners at St. Mary's in Coxsackie, thank you for providing me this wonderful rectory to live in, and I love it. But, I really wish I could move it. Like one town away, and, to have like a nice little fence around the yard so I could grill.
Yeah.
I can't grill in the backyard. People will be like, oh my gosh, look, Father's grilling. You know what I mean?
You'll be like pointing and taking photos of you grilling. Yeah.
Totally. Oh my gosh. And the kids are like, Father's not wearing his robes. Well, no, because I'm grilling, so I don't always wear my robes.
I'm making a hamburger.
I just saw Father standing up without robes on. So I guess what I'm thinking is, though that's a part of the priesthood that I wish could be taken away, but is part of the job.
Yeah.
What is a part of writing that you really wish weren't part of it, but it goes with it?
Ooh.
It's a hard question.
Mm-hmm.
What's a downside? What's the hardest part of this calling for you?
I would say, which this is kind of ironic because it's part of the reason that I do it, I would say just kind of what I mentioned before, like not knowing the reaction that it's going to get. Like it's when you write something and you feel great and you're like, oh my gosh, like I think this is good, but then you still don't know. Like you don't know how it's going to be taken. Everyone sees things differently, and so you could have just spent 2 weeks like every night trying to perfect this story, trying to have it be good, and still not know. And I think that goes hand in hand too when you start submitting stories. A lot of journals and publishers take anywhere from 3 months to a year to get back to you, and so that's a frustrating aspect too. Like you just sit there and wait, and maybe what I'm trying to get at here is like the judgment part of writing. You know, you can think inside that it's good, but you're going to be judged outwardly regardless. So
yeah, isn't that true? And that there's such vulnerability to creation, and because what you're creating is so personal and so connected and so right. That's powerful. That's powerful. So now talk to us a little bit about your writing during the day. You do something really interesting, and as soon as I found out what work you did, I was filled with questions. Talk to us about what you do during the day.
It's very strange. I never like even. I had no idea that this was a profession or an actual thing until I applied a while back and started working in this area. But I work for 2 ghostwriting agencies. I work part-time at both, so equals full-time. So I do, for one, I'm a part-time nonfiction writer, and for the other, I am an editor, and I edit what the ghostwriters write. So I edit their manuscripts.
Wow.
Yes, very different.
For some people, this whole term ghostwriting is brand new. Can you talk to us about what a ghostwriter is? So
a ghostwriter literally writes books for other people. Sometimes ghostwriters can do like blogs and things like that too, but the 2 agencies I specifically work for, it's books. So I'm writing nonfiction books for other people, which I think is interesting because for the one agency I'm doing nonfiction, and the other I'm editing fiction manuscripts. And in my personal writing, I write mostly fiction. But overall, I think I'm doing fiction because even though I'm a nonfiction writer, and I know this is confusing, even though I'm a nonfiction ghostwriter, it's still fiction to me. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. For
other people's stories.
Fascinating. So now, a lot of the listeners right now, I'm suspecting, are having their head spin because they're like, who would write a book but not actually write it? Who writes a book but has someone else who doesn't get the credit? So let's back up a minute. I'll tell you, you can tell me if I'm right about this. Here's what I suspect is a typical client of the agencies you work for. Every once in a while, a politician who is currently in office and has a really big job will, like, where they're just like working, 16-hour days. And all of a sudden they've got a new memoir out. And you're like, wait a minute. How in the world, when did that politician or that public figure, or maybe it's a famous journalist, and they're like, they're working there. You see them on the morning news, and then you see them contributing to a nighttime news magazine, and that they have a family, and now they just wrote a book, and you're like, wait just a minute, am I on to something here? Do those people have ghostwriters often?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every time you see you don't want to put down every celebrity or politician, but most of the times when you see very busy, very famous, successful, politicians, celebrities, singers putting out like a sudden book, like you just said, it's by a ghostwriter, by a professional ghostwriter.
Wow.
So that's what I do. The one agency is based out of London and the other is out of California. So a lot of the clients for the one are like more famous people in London, the London area, but a lot of them are like higher profile clients, so obviously confidentiality is like a huge thing.
Right, right.
But I'm writing all sorts of stuff. It's really interesting. I like it. And I think, a lot of people don't think it's a good thing because it's like, why would, somebody else write a book for you and you take the credit for it? But I think sometimes people have a story. Like even those politicians and those celebrities, they all have a story. They have a life that they've lived. They've been through struggles just like all of us, and they may not have the time or even the skill in some scenarios. Some people have stories and just don't know how to write them. Right. And that's what ghostwriters do. So, and I'm happy to do that for people. I think it's interesting. I'm writing a book on marriage and how to deal with conflicts in marriage.
Wow.
I'm writing this woman's autobiography right now. We have like Zoom meetings that we do, and I write it in first person for her. So it's different, but I like it. It's like writing fiction. I'm writing other people's stories.
Amazing. And I think you just I mean, for anybody who did feel uncomfortable with the concept, you just explained it in a way that's very compassionate. I mean, it's exactly, right. I mean, all of us experience limitations, and yet, if your limitation is in storytelling, that's a really unfair one because our lives are made up of stories.
Right.
So, like, I'm a terrible basketball player, but I don't need someone to go play for me. I can live a fine life without it, but I can't live a life without stories and without sharing.
Right. Exactly.
So how do you adopt the voice of the author? What do you do?
Yeah, so we can like talk to the clients. We have like software where we can communicate with them directly, but it's interesting because it keeps their like identity like safe. And then sometimes they don't really care, and they'll just tell us like who they are, and then we do Zooms. We'll talk on the phone or do video chats, and they'll some of them are very specific. They'll send outlines or paragraphs of what they want, and then others are kind of more broad. They'll tell me what they want the book to be on, and then I'll create an outline, and they approve it or deny it, and then we go from there. And they get to check in, of course, as I'm writing. They do like 25% check-ins, 75% check-ins, and then they approve the final manuscript. So,
do you ever get starstruck?
No.
Not really.
No, not really. Because they're just like normal people, so it's okay. There was one really cool person who I was writing a book for in London, and I was like someone that I knew who it was, and I was like, wow, I did not see this coming. So I was like so careful with her manuscript. And it was really
that's
cool to talk to her. And her identity was like accidentally released to me because we did like a little Zoom thing, and your name's on there.
Oh, right.
So my name was on there, and I was like, well, now we both, and she was fine with it. It wasn't a big deal. But
you have such an interesting job. You have such an interesting job.
I'm glad someone thinks so.
Oh my gosh, oh my goodness, I love it. Oh man. And of course, both of us are in the same boat because I hear some awesomely fascinating confessions that I can't talk to you about.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
And you have these amazing experiences with really interesting clients, and you can't talk. It's amazing. Yeah. That's so cool. There again, I'm just going to add another thing to calling. Gives you access to parts of other people's lives usually off limits. Hello?
That's very true.
Isn't it so interesting? Wow.
It is. And this type of work, too, it's obviously very different than like a 9-to-5 type of job where it's like, because you never know what you're going to get. Like, I never know what the next book is or what's going to happen or if they're going to like what I wrote. It's very uncertain, as is like just the entire writing experience. But I do like it because it has a lot of flexibility. Both agencies kind of go off the notion like, all right, like this is the deadline for 30,000 words, write whenever you want and just have it by then, so I don't have to do like a set time during the day. So like certain days I will literally work from like 8 o'clock till 8 at night, and then I won't work at all the next day.
Oh,
so I
wow.
can kind of set my hours, which I like a lot too, because it gives me time to write on my own or live my life or do whatever I want to do.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
What's your relationship? I think something our listeners, many personality types are thinking right now is, oh my goodness, I would tank at this because I am a procrastinator. How do you meet? What's your relationship like with deadlines? When you tell us that there's a meeting, let's say there's a meeting with someone who is a famous, celebrity or politician, and they need to have their 25% done meeting with you.
Right.
And you're only 15% done.
Yeah. I mean, so when it comes to deadlines, I'm looking at my planner right now that my dog has chewed in half. But I always keep my deadlines, in there, and I keep track. And I like trick myself. I'll put the deadline for the day before so that I'm like, okay, like, and then so that if I forget, because I often have like, several books I'm working on at once. So that way I'll be like, oh, well, that's due this day. And then that way, in case I like mess up or forget about it, I actually have one more day. So I trick myself, and I'm like, that way that never happens. I never miss deadlines. I just don't. I haven't yet. I mean, I don't want to say never, but I haven't yet.
I'm so impressed. But it does also put a little bit of tension into a value that you have, which is don't write until you have something to say.
Oh, yes.
That's a really interesting thing, because there are those writers, and I think a lot of people who've heard writers speak or have heard a TED Talk from a writer, you might hear folks saying things like, it's all about getting to the first draft and keeping your butt in the chair.
Write the first 100 words or something.
There it is. Mm-hmm. Wow. Fascinating. So there's a tension there. There is a tension, but you make it work.
Yeah, because, I mean, especially with these projects, they're handing me what to do. They're giving me the idea up front. So in that sense, it is like a reason to start writing. So
yeah.
Fascinating.
I have a question about aspiring writers. I'm sure that everybody who hears this, who knows someone, their sister's son's friend who has told everybody now that he's a junior in high school that he wants to be a writer when he grows up. They're going to forward this conversation to him. What do you want to say to everybody who wants to be a writer? What advice, now that you are doing it, you have had this calling and you followed it, and you're doing it in a big way. You're doing it as a day job and you're doing it as a vocation, and you're committing to it, you're sacrificing for it. What advice would you give, and or what cautions would you give to someone who says, that sounds great, sign me up?
Yes, I would say live a little bit first. I think a lot of my better writing came after I had some not so great life experiences, and then I started really producing stuff that people want to read. And it's not like drama stuff, but fiction, like coherent fiction stories where a lesson is learned at the end. I always say, whenever I have people read my stories before I submit them, I'm like, did you get that oomph feeling at the end? That when you read the last sentence? And that's like my goal for every story. But when I think back to when I first started writing, I cringe at some of the old stuff I read, and I'm sure, 10 years from now, I'll look back at the stuff I'm writing now and cringe. But I think it's important to have some experience, because when I first started out, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a good writer, I can write whatever. And no, I could not. Wow. I could not. But it's funny because that's what you have to do in order to write anything of substance. You have to write a million terrible things, and you have to write a million terrible first drafts before that story is good. Mm-hmm. So I think just anyone who's starting out has to expect to get rejection and write terrible stuff before you write anything good, I guess.
It's so wise. It's so wise. And I hope that everyone who's out there understands that failure is not a sign that you are on the wrong path necessarily. It may just be you're in drafting. You're drafting now.
Yes, you're drafting your life. Yes.
No, I love it. What a great conversation. Before I let you go, just a couple of questions that I like to ask everybody who joins us here, because I think these are some big questions that a lot of people ask. And the topic of this is endurance, enduring through your calling, enduring when there's setbacks. And it all came about when we started this pandemic. So one of the questions that often arises when we think about endurance is about why we have to face what we face. And some people say that the way you can face life is just trusting that every single thing happens for a reason. It all happens for a reason, so just trust. But other people say the exact opposite, just as fervently. They say nothing happens for a reason, it just happens. But we've got God's help to respond to it however we want. So they're both valid ways of looking at the world. Everything happens for a reason, so just trust, or nothing happens for a reason and just do the next right thing. Where do you stand in that? Does everything happen for a reason, do you think?
I think both of those ideas are correct in a sense. I do believe that things happen for a reason overall, but I think also we can, trust God and choose how we're going to react to the things that are happening according to his path. I do believe that even the negative things that happen in our life, we might not see it right away, but years down the road or even longer than that, we're going to be like, that's why that happened. With some of the stuff I've shared, even just with school and with going to the city and then going to UAlbany, if that hadn't have happened, I I wouldn't have got where I am today. So there's so many examples, if you go back and track stuff in anyone's life, there's so many examples of things that just simply wouldn't have happened without something else happening first. So yeah, I am a strong believer in things happening for a reason, and trusting in God. For sure, I think it's powerful to let go of control. For sure.
Is it absolutely? Yeah, I love that. How powerful it is. People think that surrender is a sign of weakness, but surrender is powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
Surrender is powerful. Oh man, you are in your young adulthood, but you have had a lot of life experiences, and you've shared very generously with us about some of the twists and turns that have happened, even in the educational part of your life. What for you has been the key to enduring the twists and turns of life so far? It's a virtue that is it's a challenge, and there's a lot of metaphors for it. People think about life being a race or a journey, a marathon, not a sprint. For you, what has been the key so far for you in the virtue of endurance?
I kind of gave it away a little, but trusting in God is something that I have only recently really been trying to do more so. There's been times in my life when I was really close to God and times when I was far away from him. And not long ago, probably a year and a half or so, I was really far. I felt far from him. And so in the past year or so, I've been trying to trust in him. When I have issues, I give it up to him. And I think that is 100% how to endure, because while you physically here in earth and in your own life are trying to go through something, he's up there making good things happen. And I think that's what makes our relationship with Jesus so special too, is that he was here, so he knows what it's like. He carried his own cross, and now we're carrying ours. So part of endurance is understanding that endurance is what we have to do in this life. Everyone has to do it. It's just part of it. And there's a Psalm 55, and it's literally about trusting God, and about, even though you have all these obstacles in your way, he's got a plan, or everything happens for a reason, So I read that every day, and it's kind of like my version of starting the day off, I give it up to you. Whatever happens today is in your plan.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to look up Psalm 55 because I don't have it memorized. Oh, that's so good to hear. Psalm 51 is about creating a clean heart in me, Lord. I've sinned. We in the church who do the Liturgy of the Hours, we do that one every Friday morning. But Psalm 55 sounds like a winner. I'm going to check that out. Wow.
For sure.
Last question for you is about the times we're in. We're turning a corner, it feels, of sorts in our journey through the pandemic. It feels like a lot more people are getting vaccinated, we're getting a better handle on things. But it certainly has been a long journey, and it's impossible for us to have gone through something so momentous without having it change us in some way.
Yeah.
What are your best hopes for what life can be like as we move beyond coronavirus, when it stops being the headline every day? What are your hopes for what life can be like?
I think it definitely shook people a lot, because we never thought something like this could happen, and definitely weren't expecting it to happen now. I mean, you're never really expecting that kind of thing to happen. But I think a lot of people felt very isolated and lonely, and had to come together in ways that, we didn't even think were possible. People were using Zoom, we're calling each other more, and I don't think life will ever go back to what the normal was before. I think we'll always be a little more cautious when it comes to germs and going out and things like that. But hopefully people will learn to just be kinder to each other and to be a little more understanding, because everyone has things going on that we can't see. And COVID was an issue that we all had, that we could see. So hopefully we'll have a little more understanding just for human life in general.
Oh, what a great hope. I love it. Tell me, before we conclude, where can our listeners find your writing?
DanielleEpting.com.
Danielle, we will put this in the notes too, in the description. DanielleEpting.com. That is so exciting. I am so excited to spend time with your writing, and so delighted by your presence with us. Before we go, I'd love for you to just linger with us for a moment, because one of the things we like to do is just savor these conversations for a moment. So I'd like to invite our listeners to just take a moment and just settle in to the sense of this. When Danny was a student in my religion classes, we used to do these things called guided meditations, and this is a little bit of that nature. I'd like to ask you to consider, who came to mind in your life when Danny shared with us about the advisor who told her, "No, you really need to listen. You have a talent for this. This is a direction I need you to consider." Or the other who said, "You really need to get these published." Who are those people in your life who have been guiding forces, who have been mentors? Can you take a moment and just feel grateful that God put those people in your life? Can you consider with us for a moment those times that you've had to change course, when you pursued something that didn't feel right, when you recognized that the plans that you told everybody about with great excitement now needed to change, and that you might have a little bit of egg on your face? How can we be gentle with one another as we allow our life path to take whatever form God wants it to? When we heard about the difference between gardeners and architects in writing, what would you say is true for you about your life? Are you approaching your life like a garden, or like a house being built? There's no right or wrong to that. Which one fits better for you, and why? One of the things that we heard was that it's wise for us to recognize we don't make it out of life alive. What are you doing to make sure that this one wild, precious life of yours really matters? Danielle Epting, we are so grateful for your presence with us here today. We're so grateful that you're following your calling, and that it gets to enrich our lives, both through reflecting on what you've shared and also by encountering your writing, which is something we all can't wait to do. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. No, it's so great. And thank you to all of our listeners. Peace be with you all. An excerpt of Danielle Epting's beloved Psalm 55. Listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught because of what my enemy is saying, because of the threats of the wicked. For they bring down suffering on me and assail me in their anger. My heart is in anguish within me, for the terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, "Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm." Lord, confuse the wicked, confound their words, for I see violence and strife in the city. Day and night they prowl about on its walls. Malice and abuse are within it. Destructive forces are at work in the city. Threats and lies never leave its streets. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were rising against me, I could hide. But it is you, someone like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet friendship at the house of God as we walked about among the worshipers. As for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and God hears my voice. God rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. God, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change, he will hear them and humble them, because they have no fear of God. My companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. Cast your cares on the Lord, and God will sustain you. God will never let the righteous be shaken. But you, God, will bring down the wicked into the pit of decay. The bloodthirsty and deceitful will not live out half their days.